This photo was found tucked away in the 1941 case files of the Massachusetts State Police, bearing the simple, unsettling title, The Hilton Road Intruder. Two men who sought refuge from the deluge were gone, vanished into the New England rain. Martha was the sole witness, alone in her house, offering a story of terror, false police, and a broken-down car. She poses here, seemingly a frightened victim, her eyes heavy with the weight of dread. You see the clean, polite 1940s dress, the simple room, and the antique radio, the very instrument that broadcast the warning that put a murderer on the street. The night began with the kind of storm that swallows sound. The sky over Essex County had been black since afternoon, the wind driving needles of rain into the old houses along Hilton Road. There was no traffic that night, only the groaning of the wind and the ticking of clocks inside homes where families locked their doors early. But Martha Hilton's house stood apart. A single slanted lamp threw a narrow blade of yellow light across her living room floor. It flickered whenever the wind banged against the shutters. The house was small, a front sitting room, a narrow kitchen, 2 bedrooms upstairs. Every creak in the walls sounded louder when there was no other voice to cover it. On the corner table, the radio hissed. It was a Philco 40 to 180, the kind families would gather around at night. But tonight, Martha was alone. She sat stiffly in the floral armchair, her hands folded tight in her lap, her eyes fixed on the glowing dial as if the voice coming from it were the only thing tethering her to the world beyond those rain-smeared windows. The broadcast was routine at first. Weather alerts, flooded bridges, downed power lines, but then the announcer's voice shifted just slightly into the brittle edge of urgency. We interrupt this program with an important bulletin from the Essex County Sheriff's Department. A dangerous escapee is believed to be at large in the area. Citizens are advised to remain indoors and not to open their doors to strangers under any circumstances. The suspect is considered extremely dangerous. The radio crackled. Rain pounded against the glass. The power inched low, the lamp dimming before snapping back. Martha's gaze never left the radio, and suddenly a knock from outside. She could not tell. Her hand hovered over the radio dial not to turn it off, but as if pressing against that humming box could somehow keep the outside world out. The voice on the broadcast returned to regular programming, but the words no longer mattered. The message had already nested deep in the air of that small, trembling house. Martha walked toward the front window. The curtains trembled in the draft. Beyond them, blackness. A storm so thick the world ended 10 feet from her porch. And then, a shape, just a dark blur under the street lamp. Standing, not moving, she backed away slowly. The lamp flickered again. For a moment, the only sound in the house was the soft, rhythmic tick of the wall clock. Then, somewhere deep in the night, came the low moan of a car engine choking against the rain. Tires grinding in mud, headlights slashing across her walls for half a second before dying. Silence returned. She felt it before she heard it, the knock. A slow, deliberate, measured knock against her front door. Martha froze. Her fingers brushed the doorknob, but did not turn it. On the other side, a man's voice broke through the storm, calm, polite, and just slightly out of breath. "Miss, I'm sorry to bother you. My car's gone out in the rain. Could I just get out of this weather for a bit?" It was the voice of a stranger, but she also remembered the warning. The wind shrieked through the gaps in the window frame. The radio whispered behind her. And outside, a man waited in the dark. This was how it began. A house isolated by a storm, a frightened woman listening to a voice on the radio. A knock on the door, when no one should have been outside. The door creaked when Martha finally unlatched it. Not wide, just enough for the light from inside to slice a thin gold line across the porch. The man on the other side stood hunched in the storm, water streaming from his hat brim and shoulders. His eyes darted toward the road behind him as if something out there was following. "I swear, miss, just for a few minutes. I'm freezing out here." His voice trembled in that half-polite, half-desperate way that makes people want to trust, or at least hesitate to slam the door. Martha hesitated too. The broadcast still echoed in the back of her mind. "A dangerous escapee is at large. Do not open your doors to strangers." But the rain was relentless. And he looked harmless, didn't he? She stepped aside. The stranger entered slowly, water dripping from his coat onto the rug. His name, he said, was Joseph Miller. His car had stalled just past the old mile marker. He swore he would only wait until the rain eased, maybe call for help when the lines came back up. She offered him a towel, then moved back toward the radio, as if the glow of its dial was safer than the man now standing in her living room. Joseph scanned the room too carefully. His eyes caught on the photographs above the mantel, the old radio, the damp window panes. His boots squelched softly on the floorboards. He smiled, but it was the sort of smile that did not quite reach the eyes. "Big storm," he said. "Feels like it's trying to wash the whole town away." Martha didn't reply. She could still hear the warning in her head. The way Joseph looked at the door after entering made her wonder, was he scared of the storm or something else? The wind howled again. The radio buzzed, as if straining to stay alive through the storm. And then, another sound, faint at first, but unmistakable. Another engine. Joseph stiffened. Martha turned slowly toward the window. Through the curtain, headlights swept across the wall. Another car, another figure climbing the steps of the porch. Before she could react, the second knock came louder, firmer, official. "This is Officer Daniels, State Police. Ma'am, I need to speak with you." Martha and Joseph exchanged a look. Joseph's lips tightened, his brow furrowed not in relief, but unease. She opened the door again. The man outside wore a long, dark coat, water streaming from the brim of his hat. A badge glimmered faintly on his chest. He was calm, too calm, his voice steady even as thunder rolled above them. "We're looking for someone. A criminal. Escaped from the psychiatric hospital in Ipswich. Very dangerous. You're alone here?" Martha nodded slowly. He asked if anyone had come by. Her heart pounded in her chest. Behind her, Joseph shifted slightly like a shadow moving without a sound. The officer stepped in. He didn't shake off the rain. He did not radio in his position. He just stood there. Joseph eyed him warily, as if trying to read the man. The storm outside roared louder, pressing against the walls like a living thing. Something in the room changed. 3 people, each calculating the other, each wondering what the others were hiding. Joseph asked to use the phone. The officer's jaw tightened. "The lines are down," Martha whispered. The officer did not ask to check. Joseph did not argue. Their silence was worse than any storm. She could feel the weight of it now. 2 strangers in her house. One claiming to be a cop. One claiming to be lost. The radio hissed again. For a split second, the newsman's voice returned. "Residents are urged not to open their doors to strangers," before the signal died in a wave of static. None of them moved. Rain beat harder on the roof. Something was wrong here, and in that moment, what none of them yet realized was simple and cruel. They were all looking for the killer, but the killer was already in the room. The house always made noise when the wind blew through Hilton Road, but tonight, it sounded different. The wind did not just rattle the walls, it pressed against them. The windows trembled in their frames like something was trying to get in or get out. Joseph Miller leaned against the mantel, water dripping from his sleeves onto the rug. Officer Daniels stood in the middle of the living room, hat still on, hands buried deep in his coat pockets. And Martha Hilton stood between them, pale, rigid, and listening. Not to the men, to the house. The storm outside roared like a train. The shutters snapped open and slammed shut again. Upstairs, something shifted, a long, dragging creak, like footsteps over the ceiling beams. Joseph snapped his head toward the staircase. "Did you hear that?" Daniels did not move. His eyes flicked to Martha for the briefest moment. "Old houses do that," he said softly. "Wind gets inside the walls." But Joseph was not convinced. His hand tightened around the back of a chair. His boots left small wet prints where he moved. He wasn't standing still anymore. Then the phone rang. All 3 froze. The rotary phone mounted in the hallway, dead for hours, was now ringing clearly through the storm. Martha whispered, "The lines are down." The bell kept ringing. Slow, mechanical, unnatural. Joseph shot Daniels a look. Daniels did not flinch. He moved toward the hall with the kind of practiced slowness of someone who did not trust what he did find. Martha's breathing quickened, audible now over the storm outside. When Daniels reached for the receiver, the ringing stopped. The line was dead, just hollow static. He stood there a moment too long, like he was listening for something beneath the silence. Then came another sound from upstairs. A thud, not the wind. Heavy. intentional. Joseph turned sharply. "There's someone up there." "No one's up there," Martha said quickly. Too quickly. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Joseph moved toward the stairs. Daniels reached out to stop him, but Joseph brushed past. The steps groaned under his weight as he climbed into the shadowed hallway above. Each creak felt louder than the storm outside. Martha stood rooted near the radio, her knuckles pale from how hard she gripped the edge of the table. Her reflection flickered faintly on the glass window. Behind her, Daniels adjusted the brim of his hat, studying her the way men study maps before walking into fog. The upstairs floorboards moaned again. Joseph's voice came down, low and tense. "There's a door open up here." Martha's lips parted. "What door?" she whispered. "The one at the end of the hall. Looks like a bedroom." A gust of wind roared through the chimney, whistling through cracks like a screen being pulled apart. Joseph stepped deeper into the dark hallway. For a heartbeat, the house went utterly silent, storm muted, shutters still. Then, the sound of footsteps, but they did not belong to Joseph. These were softer, slower, deliberate, moving through the hallway like something pacing, just out of sight. Joseph's breath caught. "Who's there?" No answer. The light flickered downstairs. The radio crackled violently, and for a fraction of a second, a voice, the same voice from the earlier broadcast, bled through. "The suspect is believed to be dangerous, may be armed." Residents urged to stay inside. Then, silence. Daniels finally drew the revolver holstered under his coat, the first solid action he'd taken since arriving. He did not announce it like a real officer might. He just drew it quiet, precise. That was the moment Joseph realized the man in the coat might not be a cop at all. "Hey," Joseph called from the top of the stairs, voice trembling now. "If you're a real cop, say something." Daniels did not answer. The house groaned again. Suddenly, a door upstairs slammed shut, a sharp, splitting crack that made Martha flinch. Joseph stumbled backward. "There's someone up here," he shouted. He rushed back toward the stairs. The lights blinked. Rain struck the roof like fists. Downstairs, Daniels stepped forward, revolver raised, but his eyes were not on Joseph. They were on Martha. She was not looking at him, or the stairs. She was staring at the front door as if waiting for something, or someone. Her breathing had gone from quick to steady, controlled, like a person settling into a familiar role. Joseph reached the bottom of the staircase, pale and shaking. "Someone's hiding in that room," he said. "I swear I heard." A second knock came. Not from the front door, from the inside of the house. The air inside the small living room shifted. The walls no longer sounded like walls. The house did not feel like shelter anymore. It felt like it was closing in around the three of them. Daniels aimed toward the hallway. Joseph pressed his back against the wall. Martha just stood there, perfectly still. Outside, the storm roared. Inside, something waited. Three people trapped together, each convinced the threat was somewhere else, none of them realizing that what they feared was already in their midst. The house had shifted from refuge to trap. By midnight, the storm had turned the road into a river of black water. The old house groaned like it was alive. Inside, time stretched thin, no one spoke, no one dared to move too quickly. Every sound was sharp, too sharp. Joseph stood by the stairwell, his breath short and uneven. Daniels still held his revolver low, the metal catching faint flashes of light whenever the lamp flickered. Martha hadn't moved from her spot near the radio. She stood unnaturally still, her hands folded neatly in front of her, eyes fixed on the front door like someone waiting for a knock she already knew was coming. The second knock from inside the house had shattered whatever uneasy trust existed between them. Joseph finally broke the silence. "I'm not staying here," he muttered. His voice shook, but it was steady enough to sound like a decision. "There's someone upstairs, or in the walls, or I don't know what, but I'm not waiting around to find out." He reached for the doorknob. It did not turn. He jiggled it again. Nothing. The latch did not budge. It's locked," he whispered. Daniel's voice was calm but colder than before. "You locked it when I came in, didn't you?" Martha tilted her head slightly, not at Joseph, not at Daniels, but at the door itself. "No," she said. Her voice was soft, steady, a strange contrast to the chaos outside. "I didn't." Joseph slammed his palm against the wood. "Then who the hell did?" No one answered. Upstairs, something dragged against the floorboards, a long, slow scrape. Not like footsteps this time. Like something heavy being pulled across the room. Joseph backed away from the door. Daniels moved toward the staircase, revolver raised now. But before he could climb, the radio crackled to life again. The suspect is believed to be armed. Last seen near Hilton Road. The broadcast fizzled, then looped a few distorted words, over and over. Last seen, Hilton Road, Hilton Road, Hilton Road. It was enough to drown out the wind for a moment. Then the lights went out. Total blackness. The storm outside became the only sound. Joseph cursed under his breath. Daniels struck a match, the small flame revealing the lines of panic on Joseph's face and the strange calm on Martha's. A loud bang echoed upstairs. Something fell, then silence. Daniels gestured for Joseph to stay put, but Joseph was not the kind of man to follow orders in a house like this. He followed Daniels up the staircase, step by slow step, the wood creaking beneath their weight. Martha did not follow. She stood by the radio, hands folded behind her back now. The matchlight flickered and climbed with them, swallowed by the darkness above. The upstairs hallway was narrow, cold, and damp. A door at the end stood slightly ajar. A draft breathed through it, carrying the faint smell of wet earth. Daniels nudged the door open with his boot. Empty. The room was bare, except for an overturned chair and a curtain flapping against a shattered window pane. Rain bled in, collecting on the floorboards. Joseph exhaled shakily. "I told you I heard something," he whispered. Daniels lowered the revolver slightly. That was his mistake. A snap echoed from behind them, like a door slamming shut downstairs. Joseph spun toward the stairwell. The narrow corridor was empty. "Where's the woman?" he whispered. Daniels did not answer. His eyes hardened. When they reached the bottom of the stairs again, the living room was empty. Martha was gone. The front door was still locked from the inside. The latch had not moved. Joseph turned in a circle. She was right here. She was right here. Joseph lunged for the door again. This time, the lock turned, but when he yanked it open, all he saw was a wall of black rain and empty road. No Martha, no footprints, no escape. Daniels swept the room with his gun raised. Nothing, not a trace of her. It was as if she'd been swallowed by the house itself. But upstairs, in the dark hallway, the bedroom door now stood wide open. Rain blew harder through the shattered window, and from the shadows inside, two faint, wet footprints led deeper into the house. The house was a tomb of wet wood and whispers. The rain outside no longer sounded like rain, it sounded like breathing. Shallow, rhythmic, patient. Joseph Miller backed away from the front door, his hands slick with sweat and rainwater. Officer Daniels paced in tight, controlled steps, his revolver catching faint glints from the match flame he'd struck. Martha Hilton was gone. The door was locked from the inside. The moment she vanished, something inside the house snapped between the two men. The silence between them grew teeth. "Where is she?" Daniels hissed. "You're the one with the gun," Joseph shot back. "You tell me." The officer's jaw flexed. Joseph's chest heaved. The storm crashed against the shutters, but they barely noticed anymore. It was not the storm they were afraid of now, it was each other. Joseph stepped closer, voice cracking but defiant. "She's gone because you're not who you say you are." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "You think I'm the one who broke into this house?" Joseph's laugh was sharp, shaking. "You show up out of nowhere, don't radio anyone, act like you own the place. I don't think you're a cop at all." Daniels raised the revolver, not at the ceiling this time, at Joseph. "And I don't think you just had car trouble." The radio buzzed to life again, static swallowing their voices, and then a single, warped line repeated, over and over, like a needle stuck on a broken record. "The suspect is armed and dangerous." Joseph and Daniels stood frozen, staring at the glowing radio as if it were speaking directly to them. "Put it down," Joseph whispered. "You first," Daniels replied. But Joseph wasn't armed, and they both knew it. Suddenly, Joseph lunged straight for the revolver. The two crashed into the wall, knocking over a lamp. Glass shattered against the floor. Their struggle echoed through the empty house, like something being torn apart. Joseph clawed at Daniels's wrist. Daniels grunted, driving a knee into his side. They stumbled, boots slipping on the soaked floorboards. A gunshot cracked through the house. The radio went silent. Joseph collapsed against the rug, his mouth opening soundlessly as the red stains spread across his shirt. His wide eyes stared at the cracked ceiling, rain leaking through somewhere above. The storm swallowed his last breath. Daniels staggered back, panting, the revolver trembling in his hand. I had no choice," he whispered to no one. But the house did not answer. The wind howled through the shattered upstairs window. Water dripped down the staircase, forming thin, snaking streams on the floor. Daniels lowered the gun slowly, turning toward the front door. It was standing wide open. He had not touched it. His throat tightened. "Martha?" He took one slow step toward the porch, then another. The storm lashed against him as he leaned out into the night. Nothing, just the road, the black trees, and the hiss of rain on the roof. Daniels spun. His flashlight beam cut across the hallway. For a second, he thought he saw a shape, a dress, wet and pale, slip past the bottom of the stairs. He raised the gun again. "Martha, stop!" No reply. He moved through the house like a man wading into a grave. The hallway groaned under his boots. The matchlight flickered against wallpaper peeling at the edges. The back door, one that had been nailed shut for years, was open just a crack. A draft slipped through it, carrying a smell like mud and iron. He approached it slowly. From behind him came the sound of a whisper, a woman's voice, just behind his ear. "You should have never come here." The gun fired again, but this time it was muffled. A heavy thud followed, echoing through the empty house. By the time state troopers reached Hilton Road the next morning, the storm had broken. The house was quiet. The floorboards were slick with rainwater. They found Joseph Miller dead in the living room, and Daniels face down in the kitchen, throat cut clean. Martha Hilton was nowhere to be found, but the officers did find something else. The real officer Daniel C. Reeves had been found earlier that night, miles away, strangled in his patrol car. The man calling himself Daniels had been an imposter. The house Martha had been in wasn't hers. It belonged to the Parker family, who were visiting relatives out of state. And Martha Hilton? She was not a victim. She was not a witness. She was the escaped psycho killer everyone was warned about. The warning on the radio had not been about a stranger outside the door. It had been about the woman inside it all along.